Sam and Ben Monthly Retro.
Welcome to episode 7 of the Sam and Ben Monthly Retro. In this episode, we cover 3 core topics. First off, how do you respond after a slow summer? How do you play catch up in September, October before the holiday periods? Secondly, we revisit Parabola's ABX efforts and what's progressed there. And finally, we look into outbound, how you actually make a fruitful and promising outbound strategy today, and specifically what a Parabola doing. Welcome again, everyone, to episode number 7 of the Ben and Sam Monthly Retro. It's the 9th month. I think we've missed one in there. It was a busy summer for us both, bit of vacation, bit of hard work, but we're on the other side of September. Ben, how was summer? Are you glad to be on the other side of it from a marketing perspective?
From a marketing perspective, for sure. From a life perspective, I'm a little jaded. Summer's great. Summer's busy. It's always fun. But honestly, fall in New York is my favorite season. It's also a great time for buyers to get back into the swing of things and campaigns to kick off. So feels good on the whole.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And fall in New York, number 1 season of the year.
No doubt.
And I sometimes think like September is somewhat a marketer's silver lining. Like the end of summer sucks, but for marketers, it just relieves the pressure. Like years ago, I think we were joking with you at Rihanna, being over summer, would see that spike in CPL, and I'd be like, Ben, why is this going up 10%? And probably was a little bit aggressive in my tone there. But Never. There's a consistent, I'm much more mature now, but consistent across B2B, in SaaS, like summer metrics go up. But I guess for you at Parabola now, did you experience that somewhat over summer, that slowdown? And like, how are you trying to build up momentum since in September and on?
Yeah, August was really slow for us, for sure. So slower than we would have liked it to be and perhaps what we'd modeled for. I think this is a classic challenge with businesses, especially growing, scaling startups that haven't experienced seasonality for the first time at scale, especially with their buyers. And I think we tried a couple interesting things in summer. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. We ended up making them work with brute force, but they felt a little bit harder than they needed to be. As an example, one of our most effective motions is hosting dinners as an extension of our community. These dinners include customers, prospects, consultants, partners. Typically, it's really easy to get folks to come to a dinner, especially because they're authentic and genuine and they have great food and great wine. We held one in New York. We got a lot of folks responding, saying, I wish I could come, but I can't, I'm not here. But ultimately, we were able to kind of get scrappy and make that work. In comparison, we're hosting another one of these dinners in Chicago in a couple of weeks. The reply rate on this sequence has been 15%, and most of those folks are saying, yes, can I come? So it's just such a stark difference. And I think in summary there, we're just leaning into deploying as much as we can, as fast as we can, and being really choosy in our priorities in Q4 here, feeling that tick back in the positive direction, and hopefully carry that momentum into Q1.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think probably my learnings have been that in those summer months, it's easy to be like, okay, let's try and force some stuff, like these numbers, so they're not so bad. And like those months shouldn't be an excuse not to do things, but you almost better spend working harder in July, August to set up September and make sure that like September covers those months, and just like be upfront, like, hey, across these 3 months, it's going to work, but we're going to have to back end it. But
totally.
It sounds
and
like
it also, it's not the same for every business. It's especially like depends on what channels you rely on. If you're a heavily PPC or paid reliant business, you should be gearing up for a summer shock. Folks are on those platforms less. They're busier. They're traveling. Naturally, advertisers are still spending. So there's a similar amount of demand for spend, but less inventory on which you can spend it. So I think what I would recommend to marketers is, one, try to get crafty with other channels that aren't where you're just at the out of luck in terms of your control. Try to bring it back into your control. And two, to your point, rather than overspending or overburning to try and compensate, just move your bigger bets to September or a month where you're more confident you can succeed, and ultimately just model for August or July being a slower month for you.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. And I think the last part I say is like to folks is like when you look at the end of the year, you go like September, October, then like 3 weeks in November, maybe one in December. Like you definitely can have good end of weeks in December and November, but like your quarter is or your last 3 months sort of spread across that period. And I think like that's why you need to front it in September. It's so hard if you start behind and haven't
Totally.
prepped in summer there.
Totally. And like what we've been balancing, and I know we want to chat about this more. I've talked a lot about like our ABX motion and how it's evolved. One of the difficult parts of having an ABX motion that you're standing up for the first time is that you're not planning as far ahead as you'd like. And so I felt like we were being a little bit more reactive and not planning. And part of the evolution of this motion is we kind of took a pause and stopped to make sure our Q4 was planned so that we could totally rip in October up to Thanksgiving, plan a couple big bet campaigns for early December, knowing that once you get past halfway through the month in December, you're probably SOL in trying to engage your prospects or your customers. And similarly, I think it's how do you use your time effectively in November and December where things might be slow? Well, for us, when you get back into January and February, that's a big time for us to go to market. And so you can try to get crafty and be reactive and generate pipe the week of Thanksgiving, or you can do your best, do what you can. You're not going to stop going to market, but plan for an amazing campaign that goes live on Jan 15th, right? Versus trying to cram something in at end of month in November where it's not received. And I think I would describe that as doing it on hard mode versus doing things on easy mode and trying to lean into what works and what feels right.
Yeah, love that. Do it on hard mode or like a lot of wasted calories. Like you're just
Totally.
putting extra unwanted effort. So I guess to wrap up point one, not useful for everyone now to hear, but to ensure that if you had a bad summer, you should probably have prepped for a good September earlier. So take note for next year. But in general, like if you're trying to catch up now and get momentum, it's all about activity. And to start with, it's like getting the volume out, doing the things that you know that work, like the events, the dinners, the campaigns, like scaling those up and front loading as much as possible. That capture point one
Nailed it.
there. Cool. Point two, you sort of touched on there around ABX. So sounds like there's somewhat of an evolution there. We've talked a lot on this podcast about what you're doing with ABX. I think a lot of the ground research work we've talked about and some of the plays that you've done via like dinners, via paid, via automation. Like talk me through or talk our listeners through like where you're at currently and maybe how that's evolved.
Yeah, I can start by reiterating context, and then I will talk through a couple of phases of the evolution of the go-to-market process, and why I'm really bullish on the direction in which we're heading. So ABM, ABX, thrown around. I certainly throw around a bunch of acronyms. All my colleagues would agree. The reason I like ABX is because X stands for everything. It's an operationally oriented process. In July, which is crazy, that's only a couple months ago, we kind of relooked at our go-to-market motion. We have a really strong alignment internally in terms of ICP focus. But on the most granular level, I would, if you're a marketer or sales leader or revenue leader, I would truly ask yourself and your teams, ICP makes sense. We have, the companies this size in this industry that do these things. How granular? Do you share a list? Do you share contacts within that list? That's the level of specificity you need to get to. And so our first realization was that while we were targeting the same ICP across all of our different marketing motions and our sales motions, it was a theoretical definition of the ICP, not literally, it is these accounts, look at them. So our first step was like creating an amazing target list, which has now grown to about 1,500 accounts. Second, part of that motion was actually building out automation and infrastructure from a sales ops and marketing ops perspective to define what stage is each account at in our funnel and what are the actual triggers that we can that move them from one stage to another. And then the goal becomes simple. For wherever the accounts are at in your funnel, drive them to hit that next stage or hit that trigger to move them to the next stage. As an example, our stages are identified, aware, interested, evaluating, customer. The very top, identified is simply an account that we found that we like, that fits our criteria, that feels like a good target for us. The next step down, aware, would be they hit our website more than twice, 2 or more contacts have engaged with multiple emails, they registered for a webinar but didn't attend, and so on. So the whole goal, it becomes formulaic. Here's the accounts, they're in this stage. You want to deploy tactics to them to have them hit a trigger, go to your website, open a bunch of emails, and click on your emails to move them to the next stage down. I think in theory, that sounds quite good. Sounds easy. I talked to a lot of executive leaders about that process and investors, and they're like, yeah, that makes total sense. But the truth is, it's not that rigid. There needs to be a balance. Totally, the infrastructure makes sense. But if you're only deploying really rigid campaigns and one-off emails to try to move folks from one stage to another, you're not going to be able to take bigger bets. And it's going to probably feel too internally focused. At least that's what it did for me. So enter stage 1 of our evolution. This was in, I'd say, August, after we'd set up a lot of that framework and a lot of the baseline automation and ops infrastructure. We went through our entire scope list as a team, sat down, and we basically, line by line, killed items that we thought weren't impactful or weren't working. We found that we were doing things just to do them, which I think is a totally natural ebb and flow that marketing teams, it's a process that teams should go through on the reg. And we cut a bunch of things so that we could all focus together on one joint motion. And we realized the crux of this motion is simple. Building and generating voice of customer-centric content and offers and distributing that to accounts in different ways based on their stage. So we ran 2 of those over a 3-week sprint. We did 2 voice of customer content pieces, one focused on AI and supply chain, the other on inbound freight tracking, very sexy topic for those that aren't in supply chain logistics or e-com. And that was a really good start in our evolution. And I think what we realized there is that we as a team, if we put our heads together, can act extremely quickly, get super creative, create great content. And the other learning is that there's actually 3 clear work streams for our team here. Content creation, content and offer distribution, always on motions, and ABX infrastructure. And so in graduating now to our second phase, through that motion, while it was definitely impactful, it was pretty much only through our owned channels. We were not planning to go to events and activate this content because we were planning so reactively. We were trying to run and sprint and do things in the moment. So I think the biggest part of this evolution now for us centers around this idea of how can we deploy quick wins this week? How can we generate growth this week? What are the acute tactics that we think will drive pipeline tomorrow? Or more broadly, account movement? And what are the bigger bets or lines in the sand that we want to be drawing for Q4 into Q1? It feels like I've entered home. It feels like we have found our homeostasis. I'll give you a couple examples of what this looks like now, and then I'll finally let you chime in. So I'm not just monologuing at you.
You're in the zone. I've got my
All
questions
right.
ready.
As an example of like a couple acute tactics, paid stopped working for us in the summer, so we shut it off, right? We were burning, kind of going back to our previous conversation. In thinking about what tactics can work for us this week, we reset some remarketing audiences and conversation ads on LinkedIn that have worked in the past with a newfound hypothesis. This is a bet we are taking in this sprint that we think can help make a dent in net new meetings and pipeline today. Impactful. Similarly, we're constantly building this target list. Our best performing outbound sequence of all time, you heard that right, best performing outbound sequence, is not trying to get folks on the horn to demo the product. It's actually inviting them to our community. So as we push new accounts into our funnel, the first touch we always give them is we find their leaders that fit the bill from a persona perspective. and we push them into this really personalized, short and sweet community invite sequence. Awesome. So those are a couple acute level motions that are happening right now, some of which are designed to move accounts from identified or aware into evaluating, which is basically like there's an op associated with this account. Others are meant to take accounts from the highest stage that have just been added to our list and move them down one level or two, just make them aware of the business. On the flip side, now that we have a couple motions that are driving or attempting to drive more immediate growth or funnel movement for our accounts, we're able to start planning for some bigger bets later in the quarter. I won't spill all the beans, but what those look like are, I'm trying to push myself and our team to find a balance of building out our own channels and going into channels where our ICP already exists. Call this almost like a push versus pull motion. It's important to invest in your own channels, but if you're only doing that, you won't grow brand or pipeline at the rate you'd like. If you're only doing external third-party channels, it's a hamster wheel and you've got to lean on some owned content. So it's a balance. So while we're building out our email channel, building out our organic LinkedIn channel, running some community acquisition sequences, we're doing 3 different podcasts this quarter, some of which are paid, some of which are owned. That's also a couple like newsletter media buys in there. We're going to an event in Chicago and we're doing a dinner there. We're hosting a masterclass like campaign with a few of our advisors who are supply chain and ops leaders who will be leading different types of classes on topics they're passionate and educated in. So again, stepping back, we went from a revamped, highly internal ABX motion that felt rigid to sprinting at 2 dedicated campaigns that were impactful, but probably too much in our worlds, to now finding that balance of tactics that are owned versus external, that are immediate versus longer term. And ultimately, what feels the most right about that for me, this is my last thought here, it's a learning and we're changing, right? I think if things aren't working to the nth best degree, then you need to be asking yourself, what do I, either as a leader or an IC, need to be changing quarter over quarter for my team to find success? So it's incredibly natural to continue this evolution. I think folks should be comfortable with it. And for us, I think that change is best summarized as finding the balance in ABX where we're generating short-term wins, investing in owned channels, while taking other bets in third party and starting to plan a bit more ahead so that we can feel really confident about the quarter as a whole. Sorry, what a mouthful. You know I'm passionate about Sam, so sometimes it just goes off.
I'll let you flow. It's like when a player's playing well and your coach on the sideline, just keep doing it, keep doing your thing. Don't need to pass the ball.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I was mostly passing back in the day because I wasn't really scoring. But yeah, I think the analogy still fits.
Okay. You're the other guy.
Yeah.
To back up to the stuff you're doing now, or just did the 2 weeks from when you say voice the customer content, are you talking about like content that your customers are contributing within on?
Totally.
Like, yeah.
It takes all different shapes, sizes, and forms. And this is not the only content we're creating. We're doing some SEO geared stuff and starting to think about some other like templates and offers on site. This may sound like a dumb realization, and it's again not like we weren't doing this before.
Safe sound.
Customers don't want to hear from vendors. Like newsflash, it's just you can be the most educated. Unless you're a vendor that is selling into the exact same space. So if I was a MarTech vendor and I was a marketing leader, marketers would want to hear from me. Shout out a company like Mutiny, right? They're a MarTech vendor. Their head of marketing is going to create marketing content. Unless you have that internally, which we do not, we sell into consumer brands. Customers don't want to hear from you. So the motion is essentially get your customers' POV on a topic. Get them to tell you about how they're using the product internally. And through that, you can create so many different types of content where you can do long form case studies. You can do short hitting listicles with like one quote or one piece of advice for each leader. And this is going to do 2 things for you as a business. One of them, I'm equally as passionate about both, but one of them is my content lead would say is the hill I would die on. First and foremost, the content's great. Yeah, like, thematically, we're writing this up and ultimately it's our POV and our take as the business. We're publishing the blog post or the piece of content. But you're hearing from the supply chain leader at insert cool company here, right? And you're getting their take. And all we're doing is providing a platform or a medium for them to share their thoughts. It's great. It's strong content. Second, perhaps even more importantly, that customer or prospect, their affinity to your brand just grew. Their client, their peers internally, their friends in the space are seeing them not only contribute to that content, but hopefully promote it. You can make some really genuine asks to customers after you build a relationship with them. Hey, would you mind like posting this on LinkedIn? Like, I thought it was really strong content, and I'd appreciate that. And so something we've been testing is not only will customers gladly repost content in which they're featured, they're also allowing us to test sponsored thought leadership ads when that content skews a little bit further towards Parabola centric. So we're getting supply chain leader at X brand to post about in an authentic way something they contributed on with Parabola, and then we're able to boost that post or sponsor it to a really concrete group of 1,500 target accounts. And so that's the content, voice of customer content motion, and a couple of the benefits of both like the value and how strong the content is, but the distribution that can come from it too.
Nice. And technical question on that last example, you're like doing like partner thought leader ads, is what you're describing?
Yeah. So in the back end of LinkedIn, you're able to boost posts of anyone at your company or anyone that is your first connection. And so you choose that advert, you put in the actual URL, which is their post URL, send them a link to approve it. And then all of a sudden you're able to then sponsor their post, even if they're not a part of your org.
Yeah. No, I've seen that tactic being used a lot more, and I think with a lot of success if you've got the right measurement in place for top of
Great,
funnel.
great call out. What's the goal, right?
Right.
If I had gone to my boss, our founder CEO, and said, we're going to generate a ton of pipe off of this, I'd be failing in that initiative. But if rather say, hey, we're going to sponsor 3 to 5 customers posts a quarter, and the goal is to continue to drive brand awareness and brand affinity from our target accounts with maybe a few inbounds here and there, some anecdotal like, hey, I saw this post. But that tactic, the goal is not to move from interested to evaluating. It's to move from identified to now aware of the business and what we do and who we help.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like, yeah, if you take it money in, money out on those type of like partner stuff, you could start to measure it maybe more effective. Like similar, like for our own webinar recently, we paid people to post about it, and like it actually drove directly a pretty low CPL, like a $10 CPL there. But there's also like just that awareness aspect that you can't like, you know, measure. Luckily, our founder doesn't, get too hooked up on the marketing ROI
Yeah.
so far.
Your founder has really changed his tune over the past 10 years.
When it's his own money, it's slightly different.
Yeah, sure.
There's no job on the line. Okay, and then maybe last question on the ABX side of things. You talked about like a lot of internal, going external, bunch of different podcasts you talked about. How are you deciding like external publications, where to prioritize, and like where to invest dollars? Like, I feel like often in different industries, it's a bit of a crapshoot.
Yeah, it's a good question. As always, I'll answer it in a couple different ways. The most honest and true answer is research. Ask your customers what they listen to, what they read. Ask 20 of them. Ask them the same exact questions, podcast, newsletters, events, put them in a list, give them a tick each time someone mentions one. And if someone feels really bullish about one, give it a bold tick. So that's a process we've done a couple times, and something that we've done again. Later this week, we're kicking off an exciting program that is getting our customers, a few of our evangelist customers, even more involved in the business. And when pitching them on this idea, this partnership, I ask them again, have you heard of this newsletter? Have you heard of this podcast? So that's one. Two is when you're thinking about engaging with a paid partner, ask them for a reference call. And so through part of this motion of taking voice of customer content and pushing it out externally, I took the piece that we put together on inbound freight, which is actually a really big deal, especially if you look at some of the port strikes that are going on. It started last night at midnight. If you actually like, yeah, you take like a very close look at that article, it's great content. I pitched it to 20 different podcasts that I've had on my list. A lot of them didn't respond to me. We got a few organic bites that we're now doing organic podcasts on. One podcast responded to me saying, "Hey, for partners like you, we do paid engagements. Let's chat." So everything about the audience, the former guests, it all sniffed right to me. Asked for an intro to a customer of theirs, had a really strong conversation, and now we're moving forward with a custom package that I helped build based on our wants and our needs. So long story short, a ton of research to make sure that you're actually not just assuming because of high audience numbers, but asking your customer. Two is getting a little bit scrappy on doing outreach and trying to get some, not just succumbing to doing paid, but trying to find your own organic zhuzh. And three is that once you've engaged with a partner that you think is worthwhile, don't be afraid to ask if they'd be willing to build their own custom program with you. Ask if you can scratch their back a bit and what you can do to help, and how you can be a valuable partner to them, and get validation on this program through other customers or engagements they've done in the past.
Yeah, I think at B2B market, especially in digital space, we can get stuck just like Google, LinkedIn, like you got no say, you're just following, you're just putting your credit card and voila, is what is going to get charged. But it's back to the old advertising method. You'd work with a partner, you'd come up with a package that makes sense and like fits your budget, and go from there.
Totally. And you got to know your buyer, right? Like if your buyer doesn't listen to podcasts, then don't do podcasts. Recently, I've been thinking more and more that like Google and LinkedIn are viable channels. In some ways, they're the easy way out. Some of the other like earned or paid programs takes more effort. And so it's truly a balance. But I think back on what we've done at Parabola and what succeeded and what hasn't. Even when I joined early, I'm not going to name the outlet, but we did a couple podcasts that at the time I described as dinky. Or
Dinky.
Yeah, like not high production
Okay.
value, weird guests, like didn't really seem like a place for us. And even those podcasts, like they succeeded. And like what is success came inbound with how'd you hear podcasts. And I remember at that time being like, that kind of like violates the schema I had set for this in my mind, that this wasn't going to be the most successful engagement. And so remembering that while I battle paid and try to continue to make it work, it's a bet for us. And so we reallocate some budget, see how that goes. And that'll, again, I'd rather do those things and sit there and wonder, because then I'll learn either way. At my previous gig at ChartHop, where I was leading a growth team under a CMO, not the marketing leader, which I am now, I wasted a ton of money doing engagements with paid outlets that I shouldn't have done, but I did them fast. We did them fast. We learned really quickly. We learned that these outlets absolutely stink, and these are money makers, and we should do them every quarter if we can. Was it a bit frivolous? Probably could have been more thoughtful, but because we were in the spirit of doing, executing, trying, we learned quicker and therefore failed quicker and succeeded quicker in other ways.
Nice. Yeah, I think, and we talked about that last podcast, like speed to learnings is even if it's a wrong or it doesn't work, like it's better to find that out quick. You touched on ABX. We briefly said we'd talk about it today, like last topic, and I won't keep it too long. You got time to jump with it? Cool. Just on outbound, we've mentioned you mentioned this has evolved a bit. Do you want to just give us your quick summary of like maybe the challenges you have with outbound and where you are now with it?
Yeah. Oh man. Good question. A lot of companies share this sentiment, I think, that like email is becoming increasingly challenging. Outbound is difficult. We certainly haven't hit the nail on the head yet. We're hiring a new like BDR team and trying to find the right fit there. But I think like my biggest learning is that if you're going to take the same playbook as everyone else, every other B2B marketer who's trying to reach your audience, which is emails that are just trying to get folks on the horn, you could provide the most value, have the best customer references, It's not going to ultimately move the needle for you, regardless of how strong that email is. And again, you have to understand your buyer. So looking at historically what's worked for us. Hasn't worked, cold outbound trying to get folks to chat. What has worked? Invites to our community, cold. Invites to dinners, cold. Super strong reply rates, really great engagement. Okay. Cold outbound with offers just to look at our product does not work. Offers that truly add value and make someone's day or life better and easier work. Okay. How do we begin to like lean more into what's working and what's not? So we've historically done like 1 or 2 dinners a quarter. What would it be like to do 4? We've historically done community invites here and there when we need a boost. What would it be like to have that always on? Great. So now we're starting to get folks to dinners and to our community. At a dinner that we held in New York in August, I had a really frank conversation with a couple of our target ICPs that was enlightening to me. Over a nice like mezcal margarita and some good food, we were chatting, and I was like, "Yeah, like we've been reaching out to you for so long. I know you've seen my name. I think my alias is being used by the team across the board. To no response. We sent you this case study. I thought it'd be valuable for you. No response. Asked you to get on a call. No response. Told you that these 3 like companies were going to dinner at this cool place in New York, and you responded immediately saying, I'm there, and can I bring a colleague? What gives? And so we got to chatting. He's like, yeah, that's what I want to do that. That sounds awesome. And then at the event, after building a little bit of rapport, me and 4 of my colleagues and 20 to 25 prospects and customers, I lean in and I'm like, by the way, like, I know you know a little bit about Parabola. This is not going to be a Sally dinner. Like, had you heard of it before I reached out? Yeah, I'd heard of it. Cool. Like, would you be game to check it out? Give me your feedback. Like, no sale required. I would truly love to get your feedback. And if there's a fit internally, I'd love to partner with you to pursue it. Yeah, let's do it. What does later this week look like? Okay. Right. Are there a couple more steps in the process? Is it a little bit of a higher cost per op because now you're paying for dinner? Yeah, sure. But like, that's what's working. It's different. No one else is doing that in the space for our type of persona. And similarly, like what we haven't still done a ton of is getting on the phone, doing cold calling, doing really personalized emails. That's probably where we'll slide in a BDR leader to take more of the onus there. But I think the way I would truly like look at it is find offers that are truly compelling, truly differentiating that your ICP likes to do. And then once you find what works, lean into it further. But I guarantee you, if you're a scaled company or a small startup and you're trying to stand up email and outbound as a channel, the one question you should be asking yourself is, how do I cut through the noise and truly differentiate myself to add value versus being just another vendor that's being snoozed in the inbox and never looked at?
Love it. Yeah, I think that's the key. Like it's always providing value. I think not just with outbound, but like all your marketing. Like if you can actually provide value, then people are going to engage and be interested. And yeah, and if you can keep the expensive drinks down, that cost per op can go down.
Yeah, but again, I'll like be frank with you. Removing team time, because team time is included in generating that dinner, building the list, doing the outreach, responding, right? So like that, I'm aware of that. I think we had 25 people at dinner, including 4 parabolists, a few customers, a couple consultant partners, and then mostly prospects. I think we ultimately spent 3.5K, 4K at dinner. Sounds right, like $150 a head. It was good food.
Nice.
And you know, our ICP likes to drink. And I think through that, we generated 9 opportunities. So I'm over here through LinkedIn trying to like celebrating $1,000 cost per op. And through this event, we got it close to like 600. Whoa, that's great. How do we do more of those? What would that look like? Right. And so zooming out like may feel expensive and may feel laborious. It's an effective motion. I think IRL in real life events is making a huge comeback. We're leaning a little bit more into trade shows. I think because email has become so saturated in LinkedIn DMs for that matter. Again, marketers are having to find more creative ways to differentiate themselves in their offerings. I think folks are hungry, no pun intended, to have more in real life events and meetings. And so that's something we're definitely indexing and investing into.
Nice. I was being facetious on the expensive drinks, but I'm sure
Oh,
you
cool.
wouldn't
I was like,
ever.
dude, don't be so cheap. Come
No,
on, bro.
no, I was heavy, but yeah, I agree that like if you can be bothered to do some of the harder things, it's actually can be more effective at times. It's just having that work.
Totally.
But on that note, I don't want to run you too late, Ben. I think that's a nice note to end on. And to recap, like post summer, how do you get momentum? Well, if you haven't done it during summer, you should if in summer you should be preparing for September. Don't worry about your summer numbers, worrying about catching up later. If you're in a position now where you haven't done that, start getting the activity, double down on what works and do it ASAP. On the ABX side of things, I think again, like don't be so rigid with your motion, get that balance of like internal on things and then how you're pushing your external presence there and outbound, and maybe for everything, add value, do the soft nudges, set the dinners, do the things that may be a little bit harder rather than just saying, hey, jump on the demo there. But
Yeah.
again, oh,
The one last thing I'd add,
one last
especially
you missed.
one last thing I'd add on top of that is like get creative. My friends at Pocus just had a really successful product launch, and I was catching up with the brilliant head of marketing, Sandy, and I was asking her how she did it. She's like, well, partly we text everyone in our network and we went like we guerrilla marketing, right? Like in addition to extremely thoughtful, great offer and strategy. So I would say underpinning all of that is getting super creative, differentiating yourself from other marketers, getting customers to be your biggest evangelists and sellers. And I think through all of that, hopefully good things will come.
Awesome. Nice note. Well, thanks, Ben. Good to be back on the routine. Episode 7 done. Enjoy the fall. Great best season in New York. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Sam.